I live in the valley in Northern California, but where I am, there's a small mountain range. My dad taught me to drive on the roads around those mountains. I love those roads. There's something therapeutic about them. Anyway, this was a while ago in the winter. I was under a lot of stress and dealing with insomnia. To keep myself sane, I'd go out on night drives to help clear my head. This particular drive is one that still haunts me. It was an extremely dark night. There were no stars, no moon. I had a lot on my mind and I just needed to drive to clear my head. Blast the music and drive. My radio didn't work, but my aux input did, and I'd blast music through my phone. These roads are somewhat curvy and hilly, but I've driven them enough I could drive them somewhat mindlessly. There was nothing around, just the road ahead of me illuminated by my headlights. I came around a corner to a straight patch and grabbed a cigarette. I looked down just a moment to light it, and when I looked up, there was someone in the road. I slammed on my brakes. What the fuck? It scared the crap out of me. A woman was in the middle of my lane walking across the road. She was dressed in jeans and a gray sweater. She looked like she was sopping wet. Her head was down and she had long dark hair that looked drenched. I couldn't see her face. She didn't have a purse or a bag. I didn't see any vehicles anywhere. There were no homes or buildings around the area. Why was she out here? She didn't seem fazed by the fact I almost just hit her, or that there was now a car in front of her. She just kept walking. Something wasn't right. My heart was already pounding from almost hitting her, but the fact she didn't acknowledge it made it even weirder. I turned down my music, put my car in park, and stepped out. Hey, are you okay? I don't know if this has happened to anyone else, but when my adrenaline gets pumping, it's like my photographic memory gets activated, and I remember every single detail. After the words came out of my mouth, she stopped walking but kept facing the side of the road. I saw her hands and they were almost white. I noticed wet footprints and small puddles coming from the other side of the road. She was definitely wet, and it seemed like she was shivering. Are you okay? She didn't move. I bent down to grab my phone out of my car, but when I looked back up, she was gone. Hey! I turned on the flashlight on my phone and looked all around for her. I couldn't find her anywhere. I walked up and down both sides and looked along in the ditches on sides of the road. Nothing. She was just gone. What the ever-living fuck? After a few minutes of searching and yelling for her, I had a reality check and realized I was out in the middle of nowhere alone in the pitch dark. I got spooked and decided to just get the hell out of there. On the way back to my car, I realized the wet footprints and puddles where she had been were gone. There was nothing wet anywhere. They wouldn't have dried that fast. Jesus Christ, what the fuck is going on? Not really knowing what to think of it all, I just got in my car and went on driving. I turned on my music and finished my smoke. About 10 minutes later, my heart finally settled and my brain wrote it off as nothing. Probably some kids playing a prank or whatever. I was honestly so stressed at the time. I didn't have energy to worry about anything else. I just needed to clear my head. The road I was on came to a fork. Harrington Road. I knew left would get me home faster. I turned right and continued on. Now, judge me if you must, but let's be real. All of us have done this at some point. Driving along and I farted. It was loud and longer than average. But when I farted, I heard someone giggle. Thinking it was part of the music, I turned down the stereo. I heard it again. It sounded like it was coming from behind me. I turned the cab light on to look behind me. Nothing. That was weird. Damn, girl, you're losing it. Maybe I'm thinking so hard I can actually hear my own thoughts? That doesn't even make any sense. I need sleep. Then I felt a pressure on my neck. Stress. I reached back to rub my neck, but it wasn't my neck that I grabbed. It was an ice-cold hand. I fucking flipped. I slammed on my brakes, threw it in park, and flew out of my car. Someone was in my car. I stood in the middle of the road in complete shock and horror. Shit! I left my phone in there. I had left my door open so the cab light was on. I didn't see anything in there. For what felt like a lifetime, I stood there with my hands over my mouth, contemplating what I should do. I slowly stepped closer to the car, examining all I could see of it. I could see my phone sitting in the console. I decided to go for it. I don't think I've ever moved that fast, but I grabbed it. Damn, I don't have service. Dread washed over me. I put on the flashlight and decided I just had to get the hell out of there. I ripped open the back door and inspected. I saw no one, but the back seat was wet. I popped the trunk and looked in there. Nothing. I suddenly got an overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. Headlights came up quickly ahead of me. A truck pulled up and the driver window rolled down. It was an older man. He looked like a farmer. He had a look of concern. That's when I realized I probably looked freaked out of my mind. I was shaking. Everything okay here, miss? Not wanting to sound like a total nut, I tried to compose my face and I decided to make something up. Oh yeah, just needing something out of my trunk. His demeanor and tone completely changed and he said something that still haunts me. Okay, sweetheart, but this isn't a place for sweet little things like you to be. You just never know what's out here, waiting. Best be on your way. I slammed my trunk closed as he drove away. At this point, I was freaked but mostly pissed. It felt like I was being pranked. I got in my car and drove as fast as I could. My mind was racing. What the heck did that creep mean? Never know what's waiting out here? And his emphasis on waiting? Like something was watching me? Why was the seat wet? What did I feel on my neck? Okay, let's be rational here. There's nothing out here. There's nothing in your car, you're stressed, and your mind is exhausted. You got this, just get out of here and get home. I drove faster than I knew was safe, but I didn't care. I left the cab light on and kept an eye on my rearview mirror. I just needed to get home. I knew exactly where I was. I just passed a bridge that was basically halfway down this side of Harrington Road. There was no point in turning around, I just needed to keep going. This would lead to the highway. I kept rubbing my neck where I felt the hand. Was it that girl? Was that a fucking ghost? No, don't go there. Just focus on the road. Ahead, my headlights flashed on a road sign and the road came to an end. I could not believe what I was looking at. Harrington Road. I was just on Harrington Road. How am I looking at this fork again? In that moment, my stereo came on at max volume. It was white noise with a faint voice screaming, "They're coming," in the background. I punched the power button, but the radio wouldn't turn off. Then my entire car shut off. It was pitch black. I tried starting it. It wouldn't click over. Doing all I could not to panic, I sat still for a moment and looked around. I saw nothing, heard nothing. I put my head down on the steering wheel and took a deep breath. This is not real. You're exhausted and you're okay. Your car will start when you try again and you will get home. I tried the key again and the car started. My headlights flashed on and in the middle of the road was the woman from before. This time she was facing my car and I could see her face. Her skin was completely white. Her eyes were red and her mouth looked like it had been sewn shut. I was completely frozen in horror and I couldn't look away. She slowly brought her arm up and was pointing at me. Or pointing behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw the farmer's truck sitting behind me. I heard the driver's door slam closed and saw him walking towards my car. I threw my car in drive and hit the gas. The girl was gone, but I saw the road sign that had been behind her. Now it said Highway 20. My tires screeched as I turned left. I was finally on the highway. I live in a very remote area and had a habit of picking up hitchhikers regularly. On Christmas night, after spending the day with my family, I was driving over the mountain back to my girlfriend's house. She lived even further in the middle of nowhere, an hour away from the nearest grocery store, on the only road leading out of the area. It's a stretch of about 20 miles flanked by woods a couple of miles deep on each side, epitomizing the rural area we all lived in. At the time, I was 18 years old, speeding along this long straight road at about 80 miles per hour, a reckless decision. But I was a careless teenager, just trying to make it home before 2 a.m. Suddenly, I sped past a man walking down the road in the dark, miles away from anything. Considering it was freezing outside, I wanted to end Christmas by doing something good, so I decided not to let someone potentially freeze to death on our mountain. I hit the brakes and backed up to where he was. When I asked him if he needed a ride, I noticed he was carrying a compound bow. Thinking to myself that carrying a bow at 1:30 a.m. likely meant he was poaching, I nevertheless told him to put it in the back of the truck and get in. After placing his bow in the back, the man got in and fell completely silent. Throughout my experiences picking up strangers, I had never encountered one who just sat in silence like that. Attempting to make conversation, I asked if he had spent Christmas with his family, to which he mumbled a terse no before returning to silence. At that point, I was eager to have him out of my truck. We continued driving in silence for a few minutes until he directed me to pull over at the upcoming turnoff. Opting for caution, I stopped at the side rather than pulling fully into the dead end. He remained in the truck for a few long, uncomfortable seconds, seemingly deliberating his next move, before finally getting out and leaving the door open. I reminded him not to forget his bow as I reached across to shut the door. He turned around to retrieve his bow from the back, then faced me again, pulled out an arrow, placed it on his bow, and drew the string back, aiming it directly at me. I stood there stunned, unable to move, as this man just aimed the arrow directly at my window, where my head was for a few seconds without saying a word. He lowered the bow, letting out a creepy smile before walking off into the night. After a moment of sitting there contemplating what I had just experienced, I started the truck back up and turned back onto the road towards my girlfriend's house. My best friend, whom I'll call Ray, and I typically drove to a spot on the mountainside to hang out because it overlooked our entire town. The road there was pretty much a straight shot, so it never felt like we were venturing into the unknown. One detail about our hangout spot is that we needed to drive past the local cemetery to get there. This detail isn't crucial to the story, but it adds an authentically creepy atmosphere. Now, let's get to the actual story. Years ago, when Ray and I were still in high school, we were constantly busy with school, work, and extracurricular activities. It wasn't often that we found the time to hang out. However, one late night while I was relaxing at home, Ray suddenly sent me a text. He had just finished work and was wondering if I wanted to go to our usual spot to eat some Mexican food. Despite the late hour, we had no school the next day, so I was up for doing something and responded positively. He offered to drive and get the food, which I readily accepted without any argument. He picked me up, and we immediately started driving toward a Mexican drive-through restaurant. At this point, we began to notice the vast amount of fog spreading throughout the streets. Given the late hour, the area felt like a ghost town. Neither Ray nor I were bothered by the unusual amount of fog. Instead, we made jokes about the fog coming. We cracked jokes multiple times as we ordered our food. Once we received our food, we headed toward our hangout spot while listening to music. Again, the fog didn't concern us. It wasn't hard to see through, but it was undeniably a bit creepy. But as we approached the straight road, I noticed there were fewer street lamps. This made sense, though, since very few people drove on it. Nevertheless, the further we went, the darker it became, with the only light coming from the bright moon. We reached a stop sign intersection and stopped as required. Directly ahead was the grand silhouette of the mountain range and the faint outline of the cemetery's front gate. While at the stop sign, I made another quip. The fog is coming. Instead of our usual laughter, we both fell utterly silent. I stared at the road before us and noticed how it became pitch black towards the end. I saw the eerie stillness of the trees and the night air. I glanced at the nearby houses, which appeared to be dark and empty. Then, as if hit by a cold wave, my heart sank. I began to hyperventilate, and immense chills overtook my body. I wanted to open the door and run. I no longer felt safe in the confines of Ray's car. Turning to look at Ray, I saw his eyes begin to water, and he too started hyperventilating. Without exchanging words, it was clear we both felt the same petrifying fear. Then, as if he read my mind, Ray swung the wheel to make a wide U-turn. All the while I was nervously laughing and swearing. A crazed, terrified hysteria took hold of me as I screamed at the top of my lungs. As quickly as the fear had begun, we were already driving in the opposite direction. Even then, I didn't feel safe. It felt as though a cataclysmic force was chasing us away as we sped down the road, as if we were evading the Grim Reaper himself. Once we were back in the lights of civilization, I looked back at Ray to see him crying. Streams of tears were rolling down his face. I noticed my vision was blurry, soon realizing tears were forming in my eyes as well. Once I calmed down, we had a short exchange. Hopefully I remembered all the details accurately. Me. Dude, what the fuck was that? Ray, I don't know. He nervously laughed. Me. I felt like we were gonna fucking die. Ray, what the fuck, man? Same here. Me. I don't know what that was, but there's something up there. Ray, or someone. We both nervously laughed. It might sound like I'm making this up, but it was a real event that happened to us. For some reason, we simultaneously felt a deep fear of death in that area. Days later, I mentioned the story to my parents, who believed me completely, saying that a similar experience had happened to my aunt. The craziest part occurred weeks later when my mom told the story to my godfather, who lives near the hangout spot. According to him, someone in a nearby house had stabbed and killed his father a few weeks prior. When I checked my phone calendar, it turned out that just a few days before Ray and I went to the mountain, that man was stabbed and murdered in the same area. I attended college 4 hours away from my hometown, and would occasionally drive home for weekend visits to see my family and high school friends. My parents are divorced, though they still lived in the same county, and at the time, my dad was living in a rather small apartment, so I would stay at my mom's ranch house in the countryside. One such weekend, after attending a late-night techno bowling event with friends, I was driving solo back to my mom's house during the early hours of the morning. Given that my mom lives in a remote area, it wasn't uncommon to encounter few or no other cars on the road during the drive. As I was driving along these country roads, I noticed another car following me. Initially, I didn't think much of it, but then I observed the other car starting to swerve behind me. It was uncomfortably close to my bumper and kept weaving back and forth. This continued for a couple of miles on the deserted, dark country roads, with no one else around. Feeling increasingly alarmed, I realized the car wasn't attempting to pass me despite having several opportunities to do so. Determined not to stop or lead them to my home in case they had malicious intentions, I began driving in circles, making as many turns as possible in an attempt to lose the pursuer. Unfortunately, the car remained right behind me, continuing its erratic behavior. Deciding to head back into the city where I had spent the evening with friends, I aimed for a state highway that had since been upgraded to a 3-lane interstate. I hoped that the higher speed, well-lit road with potentially more traffic would deter my follower. However, the car persisted in following me, matching my speed for several miles. In a moment of panic and without considering other options like drive into a police station, I made a sudden and potentially unsafe maneuver from the fast lane to an exit ramp at the last moment. This move caught the other driver off guard, causing them to miss the exit and presumably continue to the next one a few miles down the road. Having finally shaken off my unwelcome companion, I hurried back through town, driving significantly over the speed limit in a rush to reach my mom's house safely. I arrived without any further incidents, but the experience left me deeply unnerved, with every pair of headlights behind me heightening my paranoia. To this day, I can't drive at night back to my mom's house in the countryside without recalling that frightening experience. Even writing this story now makes my skin crawl. Click on this next video if you enjoyed for more content like this, and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel.